Veronica watched through her window as Margaret dragged the garden hose across 3 lawns toward her empty pool, a smug smile on the HOA president's face. But when Margaret turned the valve and brown sludge erupted instead of crystal water, her scream shattered the suburban silence. Veronica's septic system had just become Margaret's worst nightmare. Veronica Chen stood at her kitchen sink washing lunch dishes when she noticed the water pressure drop to a pathetic trickle. She turned the faucet off and on again, nothing changed. Frowning, she walked to the bathroom and tried that tap, same weak dribble. She grabbed her phone and called the water company. After navigating an automated maze, a board representative told her their systems showed normal service to her address. No outages, no issues. Veronica hung up and walked outside, circling her modest single-story home in the pleasant June sunshine. Everything looked normal until she reached the side yard where her outdoor spigot was located. The hose was gone, not just disconnected. Gone. Her heart rate picked up. She'd used that hose yesterday to water her vegetable garden, a 50-foot premium rubber hose she'd bought specifically because it didn't kink. She scanned the yard, wondering if she'd somehow moved it and forgotten, but she knew better. Someone had taken it. She walked to the front yard and looked up and down Meadowbrook Lane. The neighborhood was quiet. Sprinklers ran on the Johnsons' lawn 3 doors down. Old Mr. Peterson was trimming his roses across the street. And then she saw it. Her green hose snaked across the sidewalk from her house, crossed the Ramirez property next door, stretched over the Wilsons' decorative rock garden and disappeared into the backyard of the corner lot. Margaret Fletcher's house. Veronica's jaw clenched. Margaret Fletcher, president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association for the past 6 years, self-appointed guardian of property values and suburban standards. The woman who'd sent Veronica 3 violation notices in the past month alone for infractions including parking her 12-year-old sedan on the street overnight, allowing her grass to reach 3.2 inches instead of the mandated 3-inch maximum, and displaying a garden gnome that violated the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. Veronica followed the hose. It was definitely hers. She recognized the brass fitting she'd installed last month. As she reached Margaret's property line, she heard the unmistakable sound of rushing water. She walked around to the side gate. It was open. Through the gap she could see into Margaret's backyard. There was Margaret, 63 years old, wearing a designer swimsuit and oversized sunglasses, standing beside her newly installed in-ground pool. The pool was empty except for a few inches of water at the bottom, and Veronica's hose was stretched across the lawn, its brass nozzle wedged under a pool ladder, water flowing directly into the basin. Veronica pushed the gate open wider. Margaret. Margaret turned, clearly startled, then recovered with a cold smile. Veronica, can I help you? That's my hose, Veronica pointed. Is it? Margaret's tone was saccharine. I found it on the property line. I assumed it was abandoned. The property line between my house and yours, that's 3 houses away. Margaret shrugged. Well, I needed to fill my pool. The water company wanted to charge me extra for the volume, which I thought was unreasonable, so I improvised. Veronica stared at her. You're using my water to fill your pool. Your water is community water, Veronica. We all pay into the same system. We pay for what we use. You're using mine, that's theft. Margaret removed her sunglasses, her blue eyes sharp and hostile. That's a very serious accusation. I'd be careful about making allegations you can't prove. As HOA president, I have certain responsibilities to maintain community standards. Slander would be a violation. I'd hate to have to fine you. Veronica felt heat rise in her chest. You're threatening to fine me for calling out your theft. I'm reminding you that accusations have consequences. Margaret gestured toward the hose. Besides, what's a little water between neighbors? Think of it as your contribution to neighborhood beautification. This pool will raise all our property values. Disconnect my hose now. Margaret smiled. Or what? You'll call the police over a garden hose? They'll laugh at you. Meanwhile, I'll have to file a formal complaint about your harassment. That's a $500 fine for the first offense. Veronica's hands curled into fists. She wanted to march over and yank the hose out herself, but Margaret's property line was sacred ground in HOA law. Crossing it without permission during a dispute could trigger its own violation. This isn't over, Veronica said. I think it is. Margaret replaced her sunglasses and turned back to admire her slowly filling pool. Shut the gate on your way out. Veronica walked back to her house, her mind racing. She'd lived in Meadowbrook for 4 years, ever since her divorce had forced her to downsize from the home she'd shared with her ex-husband. She'd chosen this neighborhood because it seemed safe and quiet. She'd tolerated Margaret's petty tyranny because fighting seemed more exhausting than compliance. But this was different. This was blatant theft, and Margaret's smug certainty that she could get away with it made Veronica's blood boil. She pulled out her phone and took photos of the hose stretching from her property to Margaret's pool. Then she called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived 40 minutes later. Officer Davis was young, maybe 28, with a professional demeanor that became increasingly uncomfortable as Veronica explained the situation. "So she took your hose and is using your water," he clarified. "Yes, come look." They walked to where the hose originated at Veronica's spigot. Officer Davis examined it, made notes, then followed the path to Margaret's backyard. Margaret was now lounging on a deck chair with a magazine, the hose still flowing into her pool. "Ma'am," Officer Davis called from outside the gate. Margaret looked up, unconcerned. "Officer, can I help you? I need to ask you about this hose." "What about it? Does it belong to you?" "It was on the property line, abandoned property. Ms. Chen says it's hers and you took it from her spigot." Margaret stood, radiating indignation. "She's mistaken. I found this hose. If she can prove ownership, she's welcome to reclaim it after I'm finished using it." Officer Davis looked pained. "Ma'am, if the hose is connected to her water supply and you're using it without permission, that's theft of services." Margaret laughed. "Officer, I'm the president of this homeowners association. I've worked with the police department on numerous community initiatives. Are you really going to take her word over mine on this trivial matter?" "I'm just asking you to disconnect the hose, ma'am." "And I'm declining. This is a civil matter, not criminal. If Ms. Chen has a complaint, she can take it to small claims court. Now I have guests arriving shortly and I need to finish preparing, unless you're planning to arrest me over a garden hose." Officer Davis hesitated. Veronica could see the calculation in his eyes. Margaret had connections. This was petty. Making an issue of it would create complications. "Ms. Chen," he said quietly, "you might want to just shut off your water at the main." "That punishes me, not her," Veronica said. "I understand, but this is complicated. Property rights, HOA rules, civil versus criminal jurisdiction. It'd be better handled through other channels." Margaret was smiling again, victorious. Officer Davis returned to Veronica's driveway. "Look, off the record, she's right that this is technically civil, but you could shut off your main valve or you could call your water company and report unauthorized usage. They might have more leverage." He left. Veronica stood in her driveway, shaking with frustration. She called the water company again. After another long hold, she explained the situation to a supervisor who sounded sympathetic but helpless. "We can't disconnect service to one specific outdoor spigot," the supervisor explained. "If you shut off your main valve, that cuts water to your whole house. Otherwise, our policy is that water usage on your property is your responsibility to monitor, even when someone else is stealing it. That's a legal matter between you and them, unfortunately." Veronica hung up. She looked at her house. Shutting off the main valve meant no water for toilets, showers, cooking, or drinking. Margaret's pool would take days to fill, days without water in her own home. She walked inside and sat at her kitchen table thinking. Margaret had made a critical error. She'd assumed Veronica would simply accept this, like she'd accepted every other petty indignity, but Margaret didn't know what Veronica used to do for a living. Before the divorce, before the financial devastation her ex-husband had left her with, Veronica had been a civil engineer specializing in water systems and municipal infrastructure. She'd worked on projects across 3 states, designing drainage systems, water treatment facilities, and sewage networks. She knew exactly how residential plumbing worked, and she knew her property had something Margaret's didn't. Veronica walked to her garage and found her property survey from when she'd bought the house. She spread it across her workbench and studied it carefully. Yes, there it was. Her lot had both city water and a septic system. Most of Meadowbrook was on city sewer, but her street had been developed earlier before the main sewer lines were extended. Her house, along with 3 others on this block, still used septic tanks. And her outdoor spigot, the one Margaret's hose was connected to, could be reconfigured. Veronica smiled for the first time that day. She went online and ordered same-day delivery for several specialized plumbing parts from a commercial supplier across town. Then she called a plumber she'd worked with on a previous project, someone who owed her a favor and didn't ask unnecessary questions. He arrived at 5 that evening. His name was Eric, a taciturn man in his 50s with 30 years of experience. "You want me to do what?" he asked after Veronica explained. "Redirect the outdoor spigot from the freshwater line to the septic system's graywater outflow, not the sewage directly, just the graywater. Sink water, shower water, washing machine discharge, make it look identical from outside." Eric scratched his jaw. "That's not code. It's my property, my water, my septic system, nothing illegal about plumbing modifications on my own land. And you want this because someone is stealing my water and I want them to stop." Eric studied her face, then looked toward Margaret's house. "The HOA lady. You know her. She sent me a violation notice once for parking my work van on the street while I was fixing someone's water heater, threatened to fine the homeowner if I didn't move it immediately." He grinned. "Yeah, I'll do it." It took him 2 hours. He worked carefully, installing a concealed diverter valve inside Veronica's garage that would redirect the water source for the outdoor spigot. When he finished, the spigot looked identical. The hose was still connected, still flowing. But now it was drawing from Veronica's septic graywater tank instead of the municipal supply. "The water will look mostly clear at first," Eric explained, "but it'll have a smell and some discoloration. Soap residue, bacteria, some particulates. Not sewage, so nobody's getting seriously sick, but not something you'd want in your pool." "How long before she notices?" "Depends on her sense of smell and how close she pays attention. Could be hours, could be tomorrow." Eric packed his tools. Veronica paid him in cash, adding a generous tip. He handed her a business card. "If anyone asks, I was never here, but if you need legitimate work done, call me on the house." After he left, Veronica made herself dinner and tried to act normal, but her heart was hammering. She kept glancing out the window toward Margaret's house. The hose was still running. Margaret's pool had maybe 2 feet of water in it now. As darkness fell, Veronica saw lights come on in Margaret's backyard. She was having her party. Veronica could hear laughter and music drifting through the evening air. She went to bed early but couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard a sound that made her sit bolt upright. Screaming. Veronica rushed to her window. Margaret's backyard was still lit up and she could see several people gathered around the pool. One woman was climbing out, dripping, her face twisted in disgust. Margaret stood at the pool's edge, staring down at the water. Even from this distance, Veronica could see the problem. The pool water had a distinctly brownish tint now, and floating on the surface were clumps of what appeared to be soap scum and other debris. Margaret was shouting. Veronica couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable: fury and humiliation. Veronica watched as Margaret's guests hurried toward the house, grabbing towels, clearly desperate to shower. Margaret stood alone by the pool, then suddenly turned and looked directly at Veronica's house. Veronica stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. 3 minutes later, someone pounded on her front door. Veronica turned on the porch light and opened the door with the chain still attached. Margaret stood there, still in her swimsuit with a cover-up thrown hastily over it, her face red and contorted with rage. "What did you do?" Margaret shrieked. "I'm sorry. My pool, the water, what did you do to it?" "I didn't touch your pool, Margaret. I haven't been on your property." "The hose, you did something to the hose." "That's my hose, Margaret, on my property, connected to my water supply. What I do with my plumbing is my business." Margaret's eyes went wide as understanding dawned. You poisoned it, you contaminated your water supply." "I modified my plumbing configuration, completely legal, nothing toxic, nothing dangerous, just not freshwater anymore." "You knew I was using it." "You were stealing it, I simply changed what you were stealing." Margaret's face cycled through several shades of crimson. You destroyed my pool party, you humiliated me in front of my guests. This is assault, this is sabotage. This is consequence, Veronica said quietly. You took something that wasn't yours, you refused to stop when asked politely. You threatened me when I objected, so I exercised my legal right to modify my own plumbing on my own property. What you chose to do with the water after it left my spigot isn't my responsibility. I'll sue you, I'll have you thrown out of this neighborhood, You'll what, Margaret? Admit to the HOA board and your neighbors that you stole my water, that you filled your pool with stolen water and it turned out badly? Please, file whatever complaints you want. I have photographs, police documentation, and witness testimony to your theft. Take me to court. I'd love to explain to a judge exactly what happened. Margaret sputtered, unable to form coherent words. Now, if you'll excuse me, Veronica continued, it's late and I have work tomorrow. I suggest you disconnect my hose and return it, and maybe invest in paying for your own water like everyone else. She closed the door and locked it. Through the peephole, she watched Margaret stand on the porch for a long moment, shaking with rage before finally turning and stalking back to her house. Veronica sat down on her couch, her hands trembling. She'd done it, she'd actually done it. From outside, she heard more shouting, car doors slamming, engines starting. Margaret's party was over. Veronica went to her window and looked out. The backyard lights were off now, but in the security lights' glow, she could see Margaret standing beside her pool, staring down at the contaminated water, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The green hose lay disconnected on the grass. The next morning, Veronica found her hose coiled neatly on her front porch. No note, no apology, just the hose. She brought it inside, cleaned it thoroughly, and reconnected it to her outdoor spigot after Eric came by early to switch the plumbing back to the standard freshwater configuration. How'd it go? Eric asked, grinning. Let's just say the pool party ended early. He laughed and drove away. Veronica made coffee and prepared for work. She was a freelance consultant now, mostly working from home, analyzing municipal water systems for small towns that couldn't afford full-time engineers. The divorce had taken her job, her savings, and her old life, but she'd rebuilt, slowly, carefully. She was checking email when her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Wilcox from the Meadowbrook HOA board. We need to speak with you urgently. Please call. Veronica sighed. Here it came, Margaret's retaliation. She called the number. Patricia answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional. Miss Chen, thank you for calling back. I'll get straight to the point. Margaret Fletcher has filed a formal complaint against you alleging property damage, harassment, and deliberate contamination of her swimming pool. As board secretary, I'm required to investigate. Can you meet with the board tonight at 7? I can, Veronica said, but I have some documentation you should see first. What kind of documentation? Photos, police reports, witness statements, and engineering schematics proving Margaret stole my water and that I did nothing illegal or harmful. There was a pause. Send everything to my email. I'll review it before the meeting. Veronica compiled her evidence and sent it over. Photos of the hose stretching across multiple properties, the police report from Officer Davis's visit, a statement from Eric confirming the plumbing modification was legal and safe, a detailed technical explanation of greywater systems. She also included her calculations showing that Margaret had stolen approximately 800 gallons of water, worth roughly $6 in municipal charges, but the principle wasn't about money. At 6:45 that evening, Veronica walked to the community center 3 blocks away. The HOA board met in a small conference room with fluorescent lighting and faded carpet. 5 board members sat around a table. Patricia Wilcox, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, sat at the head. Beside her were Thomas Brennan, the treasurer, Yolanda Martinez, the vice president, and 2 other members Veronica didn't know by name. Margaret sat in a chair against the wall, her arms crossed, radiating hostility. Ms. Chen, Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair, please sit. Veronica sat. Patricia opened a folder. I've reviewed your documentation. I've also reviewed Margaret's complaint. Margaret, would you like to present your case first? Margaret stood. This woman sabotaged my property and humiliated me in front of guests. She deliberately contaminated water she knew I was using, destroying my pool and ruining an important social event. This is unacceptable behavior that violates community standards. And Ms. Chen, Patricia said, your response. Veronica remained seated. Margaret stole my water by taking my hose without permission and connecting it to her pool. When I asked her to stop, she refused and threatened me with fines. When police came, she admitted she was using my water but claimed it was her right. I modified my own plumbing on my own property, which is completely legal. What she did with water taken from my property after that point is not my responsibility. Thomas Brennan cleared his throat. But you knew she was using it. You changed it specifically to harm her. I changed it to stop her from stealing from me. The harm was a consequence of her continued theft, not my intent. Yolanda leaned forward. Margaret, is it true you took Miss Chen's hose and used her water without permission? Margaret's jaw tightened. I used a hose that was on the property line. The water belongs to all of us. We all pay into the same municipal system. But we pay for what we use individually, Thomas said. If you used her connection, that's her usage charge, not yours. It was barely $6 worth of water. $6 of her money, Patricia said quietly. She looked at Veronica. What was in this gray water? Runoff from sinks, showers, and washing machines. Soap residue, some bacteria, particulate matter, nothing toxic or hazardous. It's the same water that goes into septic drain fields, not pleasant for swimming but not dangerous. Margaret, Patricia said, did you have permission to use Ms. Chen's water? Silence. Answer the question. She wasn't using it, I needed it. This neighborhood is supposed to be about community cooperation. Community cooperation isn't theft, Patricia said flatly. She closed the folder. Based on the evidence, I'm dismissing your complaint, Margaret. Ms. Chen acted within her legal rights to modify her own plumbing. Your use of her water without permission was the initiating violation. Case closed. Margaret shot to her feet. This is outrageous. I'm the president of this association. Which makes your behavior worse, not better, Yolanda said. You're supposed to uphold community standards, not violate them. Margaret looked around the table, searching for support. She found none. Her face went white, then red again. Fine, she spat, but don't think this is over. I have authority here and I will use it. She stormed out of the room. Patricia waited until the door slammed, then looked at Veronica. I apologize on behalf of the board. Margaret has been increasingly problematic lately. We've had several complaints about her conduct. Why haven't you removed her? Veronica asked. HOA bylaws require a 2/3 member vote to remove a president. Margaret has allies, people who benefit from her looking the other way on their own violations. It's been difficult to organize opposition. Thomas leaned back in his chair. But this might change things. Word is already spreading about what happened at her pool party. People are talking. We'll see, Patricia said. She stood and extended her hand to Veronica. Thank you for your documentation. It was thorough and convincing. Veronica shook her hand and left. As she walked home through the warm evening, she felt lighter than she had in months. She'd won, not just the immediate conflict, but something more important. She'd stood up for herself. But the victory was incomplete. Margaret was still HOA president, still wielding power over the neighborhood and still furious. Over the next 2 weeks, Veronica received 4 separate violation notices, one for parking slightly over the property line, one for a mailbox that was allegedly 3 inches too far from the curb, one for trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, one for exterior paint that had supposedly faded beyond acceptable standards. Each violation came with a $50 fine. Veronica documented each notice, took photographs proving compliance or showing the alleged violations were fabricated, and filed appeals with the HOA board. But the process was exhausting and time-consuming. Margaret was making her life miserable through bureaucratic warfare. Then, 3 weeks after the pool incident, Veronica received a certified letter. She signed for it and opened the envelope with a sense of dread. It was from the HOA board, not a violation notice, a special assessment. The letter informed her that the board had voted to require all homeowners on her street to upgrade from septic systems to the municipal sewer line. Cost per household, $18,000, due within 90 days. Veronica's hands shook as she read. $18,000 she didn't have. The work wasn't actually necessary. Her septic system was only 6 years old and functioning perfectly. This was Margaret's revenge. She called Patricia Wilcox immediately. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, sounding genuinely regretful. Margaret pushed this through using an emergency health and safety provision in the bylaws. She claimed the septic systems posed contamination risks to the neighborhood. She had an inspector friend write up a report. "That's fraudulent." "Probably, but proving it would require legal action which takes time and money, and the bylaw is clear. If the board votes for a special assessment related to health and safety, it's binding." "How did she get the votes?" Patricia sighed. Thomas abstained. Yolanda voted against it. The other 3 members voted with Margaret. I couldn't vote except to break ties. "So she wins." "Unless you can find a way to challenge the assessment in court, yes." Veronica hung up and sat in silence. $18,000. She had maybe $4,000 in savings. She couldn't get a loan. Her credit was destroyed from the divorce. She'd have to sell the house. Which was exactly what Margaret wanted. Veronica felt despair creeping in, but then she remembered something. The inspector's report. Margaret had used an inspector friend. Veronica requested a copy of the report through the HOA record system. It arrived 2 days later. She read it carefully, her engineering background making the flaws obvious. The methodology was sloppy. The conclusions were overstated. The data was cherry-picked. But most importantly, the inspector had cited specific contamination tests that should have been conducted by a certified lab. Veronica called the lab listed in the report. "We have no record of any tests conducted for that address or inspector," the lab technician told her. Veronica's heart raced. "Can you put that in writing?" "Sure, email me the details." She compiled her evidence. Fraudulent inspection report, false laboratory claims. Then she did something Margaret hadn't anticipated. She contacted every other homeowner on her street who would be hit with the same assessment. 7 households. She organized a meeting. They gathered in her living room. Some were angry, some were resigned, all were desperate. "Margaret is using a fake inspection report to force this assessment," Veronica explained, showing them the evidence. "But if we fight together, we can stop it." "How?" asked David Ramirez, her next-door neighbor. "We file a joint complaint with the state HOA regulatory board. We demand an independent inspection, and we threaten legal action for fraud." An older woman named Helen spoke up. "That could take months. We have 90 days. The regulatory board can issue an injunction stopping the assessment while they investigate." I checked. They talked for 2 hours. Finally, they agreed. 7 households, 7 signatures on a formal complaint. Veronica filed it the next morning. 3 days later, Margaret showed up at Veronica's door again. This time she looked different, tired, worried. "We need to talk," Margaret said. "About what?" "The assessment, the complaint, this whole mess." Veronica crossed her arms. "I'm listening." Margaret looked around as if checking for witnesses, then spoke quietly. "I'll withdraw the assessment, call off your complaint." "Why would I do that?" "Because if this goes to the state board, they'll investigate everything. My decisions, my vendor relationships, my enforcement record. I could lose the presidency. I could face legal liability." "You should have thought of that before filing a fraudulent inspection report." Margaret's composure cracked. "I was angry. You humiliated me. You stole from me. Actions have consequences." "Please," the word came out strangled. "I'll drop the assessment. I'll rescind all your violations. I'll leave you alone. Just withdraw the complaint." Veronica studied Margaret's face. She saw fear there, real, genuine fear. Margaret had built her identity around power and control, and now it was all crumbling. Veronica felt no satisfaction, only weariness. "Withdraw the assessment first," she said, publicly, "then resign as HOA president." "What?" "You've abused your position, you've targeted people for personal grudges, you've filed false reports. Either resign or I take this all the way." Margaret's face cycled through emotions: rage, desperation, calculation. Finally, she nodded. "Fine, I'll resign. In writing, at the next board meeting, tomorrow night." Margaret left without another word. The next evening, Veronica sat in the community center with her neighbors. The room was packed. Word had spread. Margaret stood at the front, a typed letter in her shaking hands. "Effective immediately, I resign as president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association," she read in a flat voice. "The special assessment for sewer line upgrades is hereby withdrawn. All pending violations issued in the past 60 days are rescinded." She set the letter down and walked out. People erupted in conversation. "Patricia Wilcox took over the meeting. We'll need to hold a special election for a new president. In the meantime, I'll assume interim leadership as senior board member." After the meeting, several neighbors approached Veronica, thanking her. David Ramirez shook her hand. "You saved us all thousands of dollars." Helen hugged her. "You're braver than most." Veronica accepted their gratitude but felt oddly empty. She'd won, but the victory felt Pyrrhic. Margaret was gone, but Veronica had made an enemy for life. As she walked home, she saw Margaret loading boxes into her car. Their eyes met across the street. Margaret's expression was pure hatred. Then she got in her car and drove away. Veronica learned 3 weeks later that Margaret had put her house on the market. 2 months after that, it sold to a young family with 2 small children who immediately tore out the pool and installed a swing set. The new HOA president was Thomas Brennan, who ran on a platform of reasonable enforcement and community cooperation. Violation notices dropped by 80% neighborhood-wide. Veronica's life returned to normal. She worked, she gardened, she got to know her neighbors better. The hose incident became neighborhood legend, the story growing more elaborate with each retelling. One Saturday afternoon 6 months later, Veronica was planting tomatoes when Patricia Wilcox walked over. "Got a minute?" Patricia asked. "Sure." "The board wants to thank you properly. We're organizing a neighborhood improvement fund and we'd like you to head it. Use your engineering background to help people with property issues before they become violations. Paid position, 20 hours a week." Veronica sat back on her heels, surprised. "Really? Really, you stood up to corruption, you protected people, and you know what you're doing. We need someone like you." Veronica looked at her garden, at her modest house, at the neighborhood she'd fought to stay in. She thought about Margaret, about revenge, about justice, about the cost of standing up for yourself. "I'll do it," she said. Patricia smiled. "Good, welcome to the team." As Patricia walked away, Veronica returned to her planting. The afternoon sun was warm and the soil was rich and dark in her hands. Her hose lay coiled nearby, connected to clean, clear water that belonged to her and her alone. She planted the last tomato seedling, watered it carefully, and went inside to wash up. Through her kitchen window, she could see Mr. Peterson working on his roses, the Ramirez children playing in their yard, and the new family next door grilling in their backyard. No pools, no theft, no drama. Just neighbors being neighbors. And somewhere far away, Margaret Fletcher was starting over, learning the same lesson Veronica had learned years ago during her divorce. When you lose everything, you discover what you're really made of, and sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning, but about who you become in the fight. Veronica smiled, dried her hands, and started planning the neighborhood improvement fund. She had work to do, real work, work that mattered.